Hello, my name is Katie Paul Wilkerson, and I'm part of the Skoll Foundation team. I'm excited today to welcome you to the Skoll World Forum session on reimagining an economic system that works for workers. We're extremely pleased today to have an incredible group of women here to learn from and to engage with. Before we get started, I want to share a few quick items. First, the session is being recorded and will be released publicly after the event. There is language translation available for the session. You can access the translation options in the translation tab to the right of the video window. We encourage the use of the chat to engage with each other and to ask questions to our speakers. And the moderator will turn to the audience questions towards the end of the session. On social media, we're using the hashtag SkollWF, and would love for you to do the same. After the session, there are going to be some small group roundtable discussions on related topics, and you can access them by clicking the Discuss and Meetup button to the left of your screen. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to Sadia Zahidi, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum. Sadia is the head of the Center for the New Economy and Society at the World Economic Forum, and she works with the private and public sector leaders there to shape and advance economic opportunity for all. Over to you, Sadia.
Kathy, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and delighted to be here with all of you. I'll try to just kick off with a few context points and then introduce our fantastic panel, who I think will really provide us with a lot of the context as well as some of the solutions around the current challenges being faced. So, reimagining an economic system that works for workers, and especially to do that now, today, at this moment in time, where we are facing not just the ongoing disruption of technology and the fourth industrial revolution in the world of work, but added to that, the disruptions around the pandemic. Add to that the shift that we all want to make towards a greener economy, and now add to that the challenges and the knock-on implications of the war in Ukraine and all that that has done in the world of commodities, food and fuel especially. So that is some of what we're going to try to discuss today, but hopefully getting at that in a way that these challenges become a little bit more specific to certain sectors, to certain parts of the world, to specific types of workers, then hopefully trying to get a little bit more into what some of the solution spaces might be. And that's where we've got really, I think, a lot of richness to what the panelists will be able to offer, and then hopefully talk a bit more about the systemic solutions as well. So let me start with a few of those context points. The ILO is projecting that the total hours worked globally in 2022 will remain almost 2% below their pre-pandemic level, and that it translates into a deficit of about 52 million full-time equivalent jobs. Global unemployment is projected to stand overall at 207 million in 2022, surpassing its 2019 level by 21 million. In addition to that, the impact has been extremely serious for developing countries that have already higher levels of inequality and far less fiscal space to be able to deal with some of the fallout from the pandemic and weaker social protection to manage some of these issues. Roughly 2 billion workers, about 60% of those that are working globally, are working informally. In 2019, and now that number is likely to have gone up, and informal employees are 3 times more likely to have lost out on their means of earning a living over the course of these last couple of years. And finally, women constitute a large share of the workforce in the sectors that have been among the worst affected. For example, there's 70% of the workers in health and care institutions worldwide. So some of that provides us with the context of what we need to discuss today. And to have that discussion, I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel here with us. Let me begin with Andrea Dehlendorf, Executive Director, United for Respect. Welcome, Andrea. We also have with us Lorraine Sibanda, who's the President of StreetNet International. Welcome, Lorraine.
Thank you.
Finally, Sharmi Surianarain, Chief Impact Officer, Harambee Youth Employment Accelerator. Welcome, Sharmi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrea, Lorraine, Sharmi, for being here with us. We will get into some of the solutions that I know all of you want to propose, but perhaps to start just briefly from your vantage point, what are some of the main challenges that we have to tackle? What I gave were a lot of global statistics, but you're at the front lines of seeing the reality of some of this. So it would be great to hear from all of your perspectives what you think those core challenges are. And first, over to Andrea.
Thank you so much. Really honored to be a part of this panel here today. So I'm going to add one more statistic to what you laid out, which is that while all of that was happening, the 10 richest billionaires in the globe doubled their wealth to $1.5 trillion. And that's just since the pandemic. So while people worldwide and globally are facing staggering increases in economic instability, the folks at the top, the billionaires, have been amassing unprecedented levels of wealth. And that really, to me, is the backdrop on which we do our work. And the lens that we look at this is both the increase in economic inequality and the incredible amount of concentrated corporate power and resources at the top. We do our work in the United States, and so I'm going to talk a bit about how this is playing out in the United States. We specifically work in the retail sector, which is the largest private employment sector in the United States. There are 16 million people who work in that sector, and the corporate concentration is happening there. Most of the jobs at this stage are really controlled by either Walmart, Amazon, or Wall Street owned or influenced and or companies that are really, their labor practices are informed by the pressure that they feel from shareholders and investors. And what we see is three interlocking trends that have happened both in the private sector economy in the United States and specifically within the retail sector. One is an increase in economic instability. We often look at what's happening to workers through the lens of wages, which is one metric, and we've seen a really significant stagnation of wages over the last decades. But more significantly, what we've seen is just crippling levels of inequality, of economic instability. So jobs have becoming increasingly part-time, increasingly informal, increasingly gigified, where the kinds of social safety nets that had existed and were built through the 20th century in the United States have really unraveled over the last decades, and it's creating really devastating consequences for people. There's also a very significant race and gender dimension to this, where people who are concentrated in the lowest paid and most economically unstable jobs tend to be women, they tend to be people of color, they tend to be immigrants. The higher up the ladder you go, the whiter and the maler it gets. The second, as I've already mentioned, there's been tremendous corporate concentration and also technologization of the work, which I think is less a cause of the economic instability, but it is a mechanism through which economic instability is being accelerated. And then lastly, there's been a very significant decline in the institutions that have existed to protect workers. Union rates have plummeted to it's only 6% of the private sector in the United States. And so workers have they don't have anywhere to go, or they have less places to go than they did historically. And this has really created not just an impact for people's economic lives, but also for people's sense of agency in our democracy. If people are working in autocratic workplaces where they don't have a voice and they don't have a say, then they are far less likely to feel empowered in civil society. And I think unions in the United States played a really significant role in practicing democracy. And as those have unraveled, it's really created, kind of taken the bottom out of a really significant side of political participation. And the last thing I'll say is that we often look at just, or we think about the economic stability around wages, but what's been particularly pernicious and we've seen during the pandemic is, and so this isn't anything new, but the pandemic just exposed this, is that the lack of health insurance, the lack of paid time off, the lack of paid family leave, the lack of protections if you're pregnancy at work means that not only do people not have enough to pay the bills, but every single day is a choice between caring for your family, taking care of your health, or showing up for work and keeping your job. And it means that just the psychological stress and burden and the mental and physical health impacts that has on people have been just absolutely devastating. And the pandemic has only accelerated this to really crisis levels.
Thanks, Andrea. A lot of very rich context, and I think probably shared in many parts of the world. Lorraine, over to you perhaps next in terms of the challenges that you see.
Thank you very much. The informal economy is generally characterized by the absence of social protection, especially. Because when we speak about social protection, this is what protects people, citizens, human beings from the effects of shocks such as the pandemic that we have seen. And it also ensures that they lead a decent life. That life has a semblance of decency with the most basic of social protection packages. What we have encountered as workers in the informal economy is that in the informal economy, very few workers have that kind of cover or the ability to even provide themselves, to begin to do those things for themselves, mostly because very little opportunity to work. Why? Where people work are the public spaces. Informal economy workers work in the public spaces, which are their workplaces. And the public spaces are not overly friendly to informal economy workers. In some countries, I'll give an example of Zimbabwe. The bylaws from the local authorities are still archaic. They are not relevant to the current huge informal economy. They consider and spell out informal economy workers as a public nuisance, which means they do not have freedom to work. They face arrest, confiscation of goods, and sometimes they can be harassed and beaten. This is not just confined to Zimbabwe. More countries actually do practice these evil ways of dealing with the informal economy. They prioritize beautification of cities without providing alternatives for the unemployed and vulnerable workers who continue to work under precarious conditions. And looking at the current situation that we are still in, the pandemic phase. When the pandemic was at its height, the absence of opportunity to work was accentuated. It became even worse because people had to stay under lockdown. This was a necessary evil to restrict the spread of the pandemic, but it put informal economy workers in a very difficult position. In the absence of opportunity to work, there was no income generation, which meant that a lot of families went hungry. They were subject to hunger, starvation, and some even death. Death because they could not get enough food, death because they could not access quality health care. Quality health care was supposed to be a priority during the pandemic, to say that everybody should have been able to access healthcare easily. This was not so. We have so many examples of failure to access quality healthcare, which led to death. I will speak about a personal experience. I lost my husband on the 31st of December, 2020 to COVID-19 because the healthcare system was compromised then. Even the healthcare workers did not have enough protection to administer quality help or assistance to those affected or suffering from COVID-19. So this all speaks to the need for the extension or expansion of universal healthcare to the informal economy, workers, as well as other vulnerable groups. And it also speaks to the extension of universal social protection to all these groups. And when we speak about social protection, there comes so many other divergent voices which have said informal economy workers should contribute taxes. They should contribute towards social security schemes and also contribute towards social protection. I do agree that there has to be some form of contribution at some point. But what is happening right now is that when we look at the time of the pandemic, people were not even in a position to help themselves. They were not in a position to work and earn a living. As a result, even the social grants that were parceled out, most of them never reached the vulnerable. They would be announced on radio, on TV, on media, but they never reached the targeted beneficiaries.
Yeah.
And the targeted beneficiaries did not have the means to question those in authority because there was very little information about the access of these social grants to the informal economy workers. Informal economy workers continue to face harassment, violence during the COVID-19 period, especially as law enforcers moved to enforce the lockdown, as well as all the WHO protocols. Most of the time, states would announce the extension of these preventive measures, but nobody announced the measures to safeguard or protect the workers who were not working and were not earning a living. Secondly, a lot of the informal economy workers are women, and this becomes especially difficult because women had to juggle the burden of caring for the sick within their homes, extended families, and even the community, with the need to provide livelihoods for their families. This became extremely difficult for women to handle. The women certainly were the psychologists there to assure everyone that everything would be okay. They were the doctors. They are the ones who were brewing the concoctions that we saw with the advent of COVID-19. They became the dietitians. They had to make sure that everybody had a balanced diet at home. Everybody had food, even though the resources were meager and they had no chance to make a living. Having said that, the other challenges that stand out within the informal economy is the absence or inadequate provision of childcare facilities. This is a huge challenge because even though as informal economy workers we struggle as adults, our children should not struggle as children. they should enjoy their childhood. So the informal economy has got a myriad of challenges, which also robs in children. We have workers living with disability. Those are people with disabilities. They work within the informal economy in places that do not have running water, in places that have no ablution facilities, and in places that are not accessible for the people with disabilities. So for now, I think I'll take a break here and give others a chance. I'll come back if the opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine, very much for sharing the broader experience, but also your own personal experience. And I guess I'll say on behalf of the panel, our deepest condolences to you for the experience that you've so recently faced. I think the points that you raised there around informality, and even in cases where there is some support and some social schemes that are designed to support those that are the most vulnerable, if that message doesn't come through, if those are not communicated well, and if people don't have a way of co-designing them, then again, we're back to the same systemic problem that we've been facing even before this crisis. So thank you for sharing that. We'll come back to solutions and certainly pick up the conversation with you again. Sharmi, over to you in terms of the challenges that you're seeing, and then hopefully we can also use some of the experiences you've had with Harambee to start talking about some of the solutions that we could be looking at.
Thank you, Sadia, and very sorry for your loss, Lauren, and thank you for sharing your personal experience. Firstly, Sanbonani and Dumelang, my greetings from South Africa, which is, I'm delighted to be here on the one hand and overlooking Joburg City. But on the flip side, it's quite a deep and dark time as well. It is one of the most unequal countries in the world, and certainly on the African continent. And I think the challenges we face at Harambee and as South African youth, the youth that we work in partnership with, are many. But I'll start at a systemic level. For me, hearing a lot of what Andrea said and a lot of what Lorena said, for me, the system really was designed for three things. They were designed for exclusion, extraction, and invisibility by design, right? If you think about exclusion, let's start with exclusion. People wanted to, in small groups and elite groups and institutions, built walls, not gates. So, I mean, something that we talk about a lot at Harambee is about pathways and enabling pathways. But if you look at schools, at private institutions, at banks, et cetera, people built those institutions to exclude, not to include, and built walls, not gates. So that's exclusion. In terms of extraction, a lot of what you talked about, Andrea, in terms of the billionaires growing and, the unions, et cetera, our labor market system, definitely starting with the industrial era, was definitely built on extraction, not value generation back to communities, back to workers, et cetera. So for me, exclusion, extraction, and the third piece is invisibility, which you talked about, Lorraine, so eloquently, which is about the informal economy in particular. And on the physical level, that's, you don't want to see the informal economy. You want to get rid of the informal economy. You want to gentrify. You want to beautify. And on the sort of the more figurative level, we also don't want to see many people. So, in our context at Harambee, where we work so much with young people, this is something that we talk about a lot. Young people may be unemployed, but they're rarely idle. But the work that they do, the value that they bring, and many of the, the contributions you made, both Andrea and Lorraine, about care work, et cetera, is not visible or valued in the labor market. So for me, those three principles really stand out in terms of why our systems are so broken, because they were built for exclusion, extraction, and invisibility. And we really see that on a day-to-day basis. And a couple of reasons as to why, in our work in 11 years as Harambee, why we've seen that to be the case. They were designed, as I mentioned, by small groups and elites, but also for a fairly industrial era. And I think you've talked about it a little bit in both your contexts, but this belief that you get to school, you go to work, you get to university, you get degrees, you are competent, and then you get a job and remain in the job is a myth. It may have worked for a small group of people, and it may have worked for a small period of time. It is no longer true. And we see that to be the case globally. We saw that to be the case before the pandemic, certainly during the global financial recession of 2008. But we've seen that heightened and exacerbated by the pandemic, because We see decades of jobless growth, certainly on the African continent, which is, the youngest continent in the world, will have the largest workforce by 2030. And yet we are married to that myth of linear pathways and just more competence and skills and being better and excelling will actually get you a better life. And we know that's not true. So we are wedded to these institutions and beliefs, which are a myth, because we know that future is changing, that future of work is here. And certainly, jobs are actively being destroyed. Jobs are definitely more precarious, to both of the points that you made, and they do not look like jobs of the past 50 years. And yet we're saying these are the institutions. Our young people are convinced if you get a BTech degree or a degree of any kind, you'll succeed, when we know that's not the case. I just want to, maybe segue, if that's okay, Sadia, to solutions, because I think for me, this period, despite the fact that it is quite desperate and quite bleak, has offered us some opportunity for hope. Because, and I'll talk about Harambee's experience in particular, but generally, I do think the pandemic provided a window, and I think Arundhati Roy talked about it so eloquently, which is it's a portal. It's a possibility for us to redefine, to reimagine a future that really works for workers for a couple of reasons. One, the crisis was so severe, like both of you, Andrea and Lorraine, have so beautifully painted. But I also think we've really deeply felt the oppressive qualities that many of the most oppressed amongst us have felt for a long time. I mean, lockdowns in some of the most difficult parts of the world were severe, and we experienced firsthand the loss of freedoms. And for the first time, we actually empathized, with domestic workers who don't have access to a vacation. And we said, oh my goodness, we didn't get to travel for 2 years. And for the first time, those of us in power experienced those deep losses of freedoms and personal losses as well, for the first time so deeply that we are now able to sort of mobilize credibly to support these broader systemic shifts. I do think, yet, despite the fact that, yes, billionaires have grown in their wealth, certain billionaires are actually now, hopefully, trying to actually make the system more inclusive. I'm really proud of some of the champions of, care work, for example, in specifically women billionaires who are actually championing the cause of, looking at care work and inducing systemic change in that space. So I just wanted to give sort of two reasons for why I'm hopeful, and maybe paint the picture of what Harambee is doing on the ground here in South Africa and in Rwanda, where we work. But the solutions are many, and I'd love to hear Andrea and Lorraine's points here. But I'll talk about Harambee and what we call SAYouth.mobi in particular. Over 11 years, really, Harambee has built a decade of evidence of what's required to shift the system towards greater inclusion. And we operate currently a network of 2.4 million young people. We've enabled over 600,000 pathways to work, including most recently the pathwaying of 300,000 young people across South Africa to 24,000 schools, even in the most remote parts of South Africa. And formerly, we were pathwaying a lot of young people to formal sector jobs alone. So that piece has actually shifted our thinking quite a bit, even induced by the pandemic, looking in terms of more public stipended work and looking at remote work as a really huge possibility for encouraging young people to enter the labor market. But why is this inclusive? Yes, those stats are great. The scale is wonderful. But I think the point is, why is it inclusive? And we've embedded inclusion at the heart of our design. And we can do so much more. But I think inclusion is really at the core of what we do for a couple of reasons. One is inclusion is embedded into our mechanism by which we interact with young people. We have a contact center on this floor where I'm actually sitting of about 150 young people. We call them guides. And it's the reason they're called guides is we believe firmly that young people are actually architects of their own destiny. You need to be a guide on the side, not a sage on the stage, is what our team constantly reminds us. Many of them are former work seekers that have been unemployed. They are a similar demographic to the young people that they serve. They understand the lived reality of the really desperate unemployment situation that many young people in South Africa face. The contact center then affords a multi-channel experience where young people can phone in. You hear young people take calls all the time from unemployed work seekers and can be reached on our contact center through other mechanisms as well to provide free work-seeking advice. So how do you get a job? How do you build your profile? And then importantly, direct them to a site with lots of opportunities, like the ones I mentioned for teaching assistants that could be both in the big cities, but also in the remote areas. The second reason why this is inclusive is that it's designed for the lived reality of the young person. Again, it's based on 11 years of evidence of Harambee's on what barriers young people face. And it's drawn from all of these conversations, really. Young people would tell us all the time, data is expensive. South Africa's data costs, I think, at least 2 years ago, with 3 times that of Nigeria and India's to buy 1 gigabyte of data. So even if you had a smartphone and had Wi-Fi, you actually had to pay a lot of money to access a job site. And that, excluded and pushed even more people into poverty over COVID. So we realized that by zero rating, by making it data free, by making it free for young people, we could enable a little bit a lever towards inclusion. We now know that there are even other barriers that are really difficult to address, but childcare, both of you talked about that. Transport is a huge one. Spatial disaggregation in South Africa because of apartheid was a huge factor. So how do you encourage employers to provide a first paycheck in advance so that people aren't paying upfront for transport with money they don't have? So things like that to address the issues, that barriers that young people face are really important. The third one is, meeting young people where they are, both physically and on the internet, is a huge lever for inclusion. We're located in the city center, so it's within easy access of transport. I mean, right now we don't do as much face-to-face work because of the pandemic and the nature of our shifts. But physically, if you are designing for inclusion, meet the young people or meet your people where they are. Don't make them come to you. And those are additional levers and that you could use to address the issues, that the barriers that young people face. On the internet, we need to be on WhatsApp. We need to be on TikTok. I mean, I don't know anything about social media, but that's where young people are. And we need to ensure that this is actually addressing their needs, not necessarily our assumptions of how they need to be heard. And then I want to just mention that, innovations can come from young people. I think yesterday we were talking to one of our contact center agents and telling us that when we conduct so many calls, maybe about 500 to up to possibly 3,000 calls a day, they tell us what's innovative. They tell us that, don't make us sign on multiple times with multiple devices. Keep us logged in. And so we made that innovation, happen and ensure that, any sort of barrier that they're experiencing, they're giving us feedback directly to say, don't make it difficult for us and hear us. These are things that you could do to improve the system that you're helping co-design. The last thing, and I'll end here, is these critical conversations and these problems that we're trying to address, we feel that it's really important that they're being addressed by young people. As I mentioned, they're architects of their own destiny, because they need to be heard and feel like they're not without hope. Yesterday, I had a privilege of listening to one such call by a young woman named Andronika Palane. She's just a celebrity at Harambee. And yesterday, she provided an ear to someone whose job search had really turned desperate. This conversation was not your scripted, typical contact center conversation. It was real, it was present, and it was attuned to the needs of the young person on the other end who really needed to be helped and partnered with. It was an amazing conversation. But what demonstrated the power for me, it was not just the power of the conversation. It drew on a decade of evidence that showed all the barriers were being addressed. So the young person was provided with access to links for access to income generation activities, our job sites, our zero-rated job sites. So drawing on a decade of evidence, understanding the lived reality of young people, providing information that could address that young person, but at the end of the day, being human-centered and really present is really powerful, and importantly, in encouraging young people to be the architects of their own futures. So yeah, we're really delighted to be on this journey. It's really important work, and I could keep talking about this, but those are just some examples of solutions to address this critical issue.
Thank you. That was great. I think you gave us that injection of hope for this conversation as well, and some very precise pathways, and also how they need to be co-designed with young people. I mean, how transferable is this? Andrea or Lorraine, whichever one of you would like to come in. One, on this front, are some of these transferable pathways and practices? And two, some of the solutions that you've seen and applied. Andrea, perhaps over to you first.
Great. Yeah, a lot of resonance, particularly around the importance of really innovating and changing how we reach and connect people. The world, I think we hear a lot about how disruptive, harmful the rise of technology and the internet has been, but it's also created revolutionary new mechanisms for people to come together and organize. We have a network that reaches millions of people, engages hundreds of thousands of workers across retailers, and more recently in the United States, many of you have probably read about a unionization victory at an Amazon warehouse that used TikTok videos as a way to really build support and get the word out. And I think we have to listen to people who are the most impacted, because they are already doing this. They are organizing with or without civil society organizations, and they are making those connections. And so we need to find and go to where people are. The three levels of solutions that I want to talk about that we work on are really straightforward. One is we have to transform the quality of jobs, period. 100 years ago, Henry Ford made a decision to double the pay of people who worked in the auto plants. This was, a result of organizing and action, but they just did it. They doubled the pay. There is no reason, with the kind of corporate profit, the kind of profits that these mega corporations have made, that these employers cannot just decide today to double pay and increase the quality of these jobs. Employers need to start providing access to childcare, as Lorraine mentioned, need to start providing training opportunities for people, ensure that if somebody is sick, they don't have to go to work. There was in one of our, somebody that we're working with right now, a family member came in sick to a Walmart in Arkansas and felt pressured to show up at work, was not told to go home, did not have their temperature checked when they went in, and died on the floor of a bathroom. This is happening all the time. This could be avoided if there are policies in place for paid sick time, paid leave, full-time work if you want it, part-time work if you need it, the ability to have a schedule that works around your childcare needs. There are a whole set of very simple, straightforward job quality provisions that could be put into place immediately by corporate employers and every employer, and that just needs to happen. And I think everybody decided during the pandemic that essential workers were so important. People came out in droves to clap and cheer and celebrate essential workers, but we have done nothing to transform the quality of essential jobs. And that is the urgent and most foundational piece that needs to happen. Also, of course, the role of the state in passing laws and policies that do it. But I really believe we cannot let corporate employers off the hook for just doing it because they can and they have the money. They could do it tomorrow. The second dimension of this is that we have to increase the mechanisms and the vehicles and the abilities for workers to have organization and to govern. Workers should be sitting on the boards of corporations. There should be committees with worker voice and power at every single work site that really mirror whatever the governance, the management structure of the companies themselves are. We have been working to establish pandemic councils that would play a role on establishing and overseeing the health and safety and COVID-related protocols and policies that are in place. There's been some interesting work in some Scandinavian countries on councils that govern the implementation of technology and automation into the workplace. The people's rights and protections to speak out and organize without retaliation need to be strengthened and advanced. So workers need to be able to organize, and they need to be able to have a voice and participate in governing where they work. And then the third level is that we have to address the structural conditions that enable the kind of extraction that Sharmi was talking about. And just really get at the structural problem. And so we believe that every government needs to be looking at passing anti-monopoly policies to really check the kind of concentrated monopolistic power that corporations like Amazon have at this moment. We need in the United States and in other countries, we have to address what we call what's shareholder primacy, which is that the only logic that people can use for business decisions is how much return is it going to give to the investors and shareholders. That cannot be the only metric. And we have to change the rules and the underlying logic of the system so that that return on investment to those who are investing the money is not the only metric of success that is possible. And we have to really change the lens through which technology and the technologization of workplaces is incorporated. That we cannot only be thinking about and deploying technology technology to make more money and more corporate profit. We need to change the rules so that the massive public investment in these technologies, that there is a real return on this in terms of technology being invested and used to the act for social good and for common good versus just for corporate profit. So those really are the three levels that we're looking at in terms of solutions.
Great, thank you, Andrea. Lorraine, over to you around the solution space, including what your organization is doing.
Thank you, Sadia. And thank you, Sharmi and Andrea, for all those insights into the solutions, which actually I find that we are presenting what is really interrelated. Now I will go straight away to what StreetNet did at the height of the pandemic, has been doing, and continues to do. Firstly, I would like to mention that StreetNet International is a global platform of informal economy workers in 52 countries, and it works with over 56 organizations which work with informal economy workers. These organizations are led by informal economy workers, which makes them unique in that when we talk about issues, when we present even the challenges, then solutions, we are speaking about lived realities. And the rhetoric is we rather than them, which is very important because I believe that in every situation, the affected should articulate their own issues. At the height of the pandemic, StreetNet International began to attend closely to these lived realities by continuing to support the affiliates to advocate, approach advocacy in a different manner. The issue of advocacy in terms of speaking to their governments, the local authorities, and other stakeholders who are involved or who work with the informal economy workers from day to day, and even appealing to us to support from other organizations in terms of raising the voice of the informal economy workers towards the achievement of provision of social protection and so on and so forth. So we did not only raise the voice and call for the extension, we also provided solutions as to how that could be done. For instance, we have discussed to say the informal economy is very complex and it is not homogeneous. It has got very different levels of income, very different kinds of trades. And what should be actually it is necessary that even as we approach the extension of social protection and social security, we are alive to the fact that we can have contributory schemes as well as non-contributory schemes. Contributory schemes for those who make enough for them to contribute to the basic social protection package, and non-contributory to those whose income generation projects do not give them enough to contribute. And also, we have worked around proposing ways around which the informal economy workers can organize themselves, having experienced the issue of lockdowns and the fact that people are now not allowed to work in public spaces. We have seen it fit to say we can move more towards social solidarity economy as a new form of organizing the informal economy, to mean that if these workers work in groups, it will also enrich and bring quality to the work that they do. They will also work in a more accountable manner. Every member will be accountable to the group. And that way we believe their livelihoods will become more sustainable. StreetNet International, working with WECO, the HomeNet International and International Domestic Workers Federation, continued to train workers online, virtually. We use the online platforms, firstly by training our members on how to use these new forms of communication like Zoom. Our members became very active on Zoom. We continued to hold trainings using Zoom, our meetings using Zoom and other online platforms. And we continued to hold conversations that were actually speaking to the different levels of governance. We spoke to governments, we spoke to the International Labour Organization, we engaged the International Labour Conference, who thankfully gave us a platform to speak. And these were done through the online conversations. And there is also evidence, because such statements, engagements, webinars, and podcasts can be tracked. It also gave us a new approach to say, the new approach of work could be to say, now we have evidence of work because our work was live, virtually. So we could even feel it that we have recorded our work. This is what we are doing. And this is what everyone is thinking in their different corners. Nobody would manipulate the other to say, let us have such a thought. One would be speaking from their own home. And that was very rich for us. We got a new dimension of work. That is the opportunity that COVID also presented, the new approach to work using virtual platforms. And we also continued to work with other organizations which are like-minded. In the new approach towards funding, we trained our members, our member organizations, on crowdfunding, which means that now they are also in a position to be self-innovative towards getting funds. They can crowdfund for a particular challenge or issue that is pertinent to their area of operation. And as we continued to work with our members, we were also innovative. Our members were innovative in coming up with homemade personal protective equipment. That was very key in preventing the spread of COVID-19. The innovation was so much that even when we started to slowly go back to work in the public spaces, our members had knowledge on how to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Constant washing of hands, constant sanitizing of hands, and sanitizing their clients as well as keeping the physical distance. We prefer to call it physical distance because as a people, as human beings, we cannot afford to be socially distanced. If we are socially distanced, it means we are not each other.
Thank you. May I just interrupt? I think you have a fantastic list of all of the possible solutions. And I noticed that our audience is starting to send quite a few questions through, and we have about 11 minutes left. So if I can just give you back maybe just final couple of points from your side, and then we'll try to move on to the questions and hopefully still take a closing statement from everybody.
All right. So the last point is, above all, we continue to give updates online about each and every affiliate, what they were doing to combat the effects of COVID-19, the challenges that they were facing, and this created continued solidarity and strength. And towards the solutions, we have said, let's open up the social dialogue platforms. we need informal economy workers to be present and articulate their issues at the social dialogue platforms, so that at the end of the day, whatever solutions may be discussed will be relevant to the informal economy workers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think a number of systems change solutions integrated within that, the use of technology, platforms for training workers, changes to funding models, crowdfunding, and so an important use of technology there. I think from Sharmi, we've heard about the systemic change pathways that can come from essentially thinking very differently about how to work with youth on designing some of these solutions. Andrea, we heard from you around changing corporations. We've heard from all of you around changing social protection mechanisms. We have a couple of questions here that relate to the role of corporations and how that can be changed. And then one that touches upon the relationship between employers and employees and how that needs to be rethought in the so-called informal sector. I'm going to try to invite perhaps Sharmi to come in here with a couple of thoughts, and then take a final couple of words from all of you around the messages that you would like to leave for our audience. Sharmi, over to you.
Thanks, Sadia, and thanks for the comments earlier. Couple of points. In our experience working with employers, we need employers because we need the jobs, right? So I think for us, and I think the informal economy is a particularly thorny one, but we need employers because we need opportunities. We need also ways out of poverty for many of our young people. So we experience a deep need to work closely with employers. That said, I think a lot of the points that Andrea and Lorraine made are so important. So I think we take an approach of partnership and advocacy and critically working with employers, again, where they are, and also working not just one-on-one, but also at the sector level to encourage change. A couple of instances would be where we advocate for the dropping of unnecessary barriers, such as qualifications that aren't relevant to the job, or work experience, years of work experience that are asked for entry-level jobs. And so we try to sort of break down and kind of connect across this disconnect between employers on the one hand and young people, and try to really build trust as an intermediary to ensure that mismatch is not really felt by the young person, because unfortunately they end up being the one that pays for all of these mismatches by not getting included. Another example, I think, would be working at the sector level, which is around encouraging not just job growth. And I think, Andrea, you mentioned, looking for jobs of the future, et cetera. But I think, and it's a really important call to action, is making those jobs of the future inclusive jobs, jobs that can, employ young people, perhaps with not as, the legacy of qualifications, et cetera, is a big one to overcome, but really incentivizing inclusion. And what does that mean? So encourage employers to employ young people that, are from different demographics. We have to work quite carefully to ensure that they see the value of inclusion, but inclusion is not a zero-sum game. And I think we need to also think about it as, what is the demonstrated value? What are the things that we can ensure employers get out of getting more women plumbers into the industry? They're actually sometimes really great at doing the work. So I think there's a delicate sort of trade-off between playing the advocacy role, encouraging for inclusion, and ensuring that we also see that opportunities are a key driver for growth for many of our excluded young people. I think the critical emphasis on this is partnerships and encouraging that we take the lived reality and the voices on the ground. Lorraine talked about, the voice of the informal economy, which really needs to feel less invisible. And I think that's been, where do people like us with organizations like ourselves that play this intermediary role, that can collate the data, that can speak and can organize platforms, share the voices such that they really influence institutions and employers and people in power to be more inclusive. And I think it's a long run game. It's not an easy game, but I do think at the center and at the heart of that is partnerships. And maybe I'll conclude with this perhaps as well, but I really wanted to emphasize the critical role of government in this space, because I think government as an enforcer of, labor protections on the one hand, or being the single biggest lever for inclusion, at least in my part of the world, because they are the biggest lever for scale. Government is the biggest scale technology, at least in sub-Saharan Africa. So those are a couple of thoughts, but I'm sure Andrea and Lorraine, you can share more.
Thank you, Sharmi. Really important point there, especially now in today's era of much bigger government, much more resting in the role of regulation at present. Thank you for that. Lorraine, and then final word to Andrea in the remaining couple of minutes of this session. Your one takeaway, what's your call to action? We've got 5,000 people at this forum, half of whom are social entrepreneurs with amazing networks around the world, tackling many of the same issues that you're all tackling. What's your one call to action, Lorraine?
My one call to action is that there should be no harm. I encourage that we do no harm to any worker, be they in the informal or formal economy, in line with the ILO Convention 190 on the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work. We should see a new approach to work that is redistributive, which promotes equity and equality, and also gives respect to human rights. Because when we look at the informal economy, it is not just about figures. Mm-hmm. It is not just about statistics. It is not just a phrase to say informal economy. This is humanity. It has got a huge number of human beings. Whatever solutions we come up with, whatever solutions we push forward should be human rights based. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrea?
So I would say that as a society, we are allowing, instead of the arc moving towards greater equality, we are allowing increasing inequality to happen and corporate concentration. And all of us have to really look at what are we doing to challenge the incredible monopolistic power of a small handful of mega corporations, and what can we do to stop that, and what can we do to empower workers and communities? Because we're talking here about the impacts of communities, but these same corporations, and we can look at Amazon, are responsible for devastation of the climate. The Amazon model of their entire business model is not compatible with a sustainable climate for the globe. These same corporations are providing the technology that is being used by authoritarian government security services. And we have to link the impacts of workers to the climate, to communities, to democracy. And we have to put power and decision-making into the hands of impacted communities and working people. And that means, yes, taking some away from the corporations that have too much of it right now. And I've put 2 links to some places that you can learn more about how this work is happening both in the United States and globally around Amazon, and really encourage people to check it out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine, for raising the point around common humanity and ensuring that all of the changes that we aspire for are based around human rights. Thank you, Andrea, for raising the point around tackling power imbalances in this new world of work that we want to create. And Sharmi, since we do have a minute left, can I come to you for your call to action as well?
I think for me, it's about, when we want to go far, you go together. So for me, these are the most complex problems that we have ever faced. I don't think it's just civil society. I don't think it's just private sector. I don't think it's just government. I think it requires a very unique multi-stakeholder partnership. So if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you have to go together across all of these different institutions and stakeholder groups. So let's go far.
Thank you so much. I think a fantastic closing statement for our discussion today. Thank you to Andrea, thank you, Sharmi, and thank you, Lorraine, for sharing your organizational experiences, sharing some of your personal experiences, and I think giving all of us a lot of food for thought on how to design that more inclusive economy for workers as we move forward out of this pandemic context. Thank you so much to everyone.
Thank you.
You're welcome.